All right, we're back with another team preview. This time it is my San Francisco 49ers, baby. So all 32 teams. We're going over them and every fantasy relevant player. Make sure you guys drop a sub, hit the like button, and check out the rest of the teams as a team preview playlist down below. All right. So the San Francisco 49ers coming off a Super Bowl loss. I know. Coming off a Super Bowl loss. It's going to be a lot of the same. This offseason almost got a little interesting right before the draft. Some trade rumors about the wide receivers. So obviously we'll talk about that, but it's going to be a lot of the same for the San Francisco 49ers team. But there's still a little bit of value to be had when it comes to the fantasy aspect of this thing. All right. So I'm expecting a lot of like similar players doing similar things. There's a rookie in the fold now, first round wide receiver. So we'll talk about his impact and where I think this team can be, where there can be some value on this team. All right. So when it comes to the quarterback position, obviously Brock Purdy is going to be the rock for this team. He was really consistent last year, finished as the QB6, 4,280 yards passing, 31 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. I mean, he should still be top 10. Like, there's no question in my mind. And you're probably going to, because he doesn't have the name power of like Mahomes, he doesn't have the upside of like Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud. We're probably going to get a good value on Brock Purdy this season. So even though he was a QB6 last year, he came into the offseason last year dealing with that injury, shoulder injury, elbow injury. I forget exactly what it was, elbow injury. But he clearly proved he was past that. And the play from this team helped elevate his floor on a weekly basis. So I like Brock Purdy at whatever value you can get him as. And like I said, he just doesn't have, because he was Mr. Irrelevant, because he was mired in a quarterback controversy his first year in the league. Now we're getting good value still. He hasn't, even though he's a Super Bowl, he's played in the Super Bowl, we're still going to get him in the Jordan Love to that range. So I like Brock Purdy's value. I think he'll be an asset to a lot of fantasy managers this season. Next up, we got to talk about Christian McCaffrey, who was the RB1 of last season and still should be phenomenal for fantasy teams. Had 1,459 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns on the ground, 67 catches, 564 yards in the air, and 7 receiving touchdowns. And much like last year, we can expect him to be at the top of the running back conversation. McCaffrey led the league in touchdowns last year. He should be up there again this season. So before this last season, even before that, he's been thought to be like really injury prone. Christian McCaffrey is, and he's now had back-to-back pretty healthy seasons. Obviously missed a little bit of time here and there and been bumped here and there, but for the most part, he's been pretty healthy over the last 2 seasons. And in this season, specifically in the 2023 season, he had more usage in the red zone, which you love to see, right? So as far as Christian McCaffrey goes, I don't know why you would expect anything else. Pretty safe as long as he can stay healthy. The team loves to use him in the red zone. The team likes to use him in the passing game, and you can't really ask for much more than that when it comes to fantasy. So he's such a vital part of the Niner offense. There's no reason to think that Christian McCaffrey will be anything less than a top 3 back at floor, with probably the potential to be number 1 running back if he stays healthy. So Christian McCaffrey, very well worth the first pick overall in fantasy, even in PPR leagues. If you want to take a receiver, Tyreek Hill, you want to go CeeDee Lamb, that's fine. But Christian McCaffrey at the running back position gives you such an edge when he's able to score 24 points a game. So I'm not mad if you want to take Christian McCaffrey first overall. It's up to you, but he should be the first running back off the board. And obviously, like I said, at play to be number 1 running back if he stays healthy all season long. Then when it comes to receivers, it's DEEBO and it's Brandon AIYUK, and now Ricky Pearsall. But DEEBO Samuel, coming off of a year where people were questioning if DEEBO was still him, if he still had the upside, finished as the wide receiver 15 in just 15 games. Did it on the ground, did it in the passing game. He had 60 catches, 892 yards, and 7 TDs. So he wasn't quite at the same pace that he was in 2021, where he was the wide receiver 3 and he was locked and loaded. But he looked like his normal self. And that's what we wanted to see as fantasy managers, is which DEEBO should we expect? And I think that's the DEEBO we should get used to seeing, is that wide receiver 2 with massive weekly upside, DEEBO Samuel. He's likely to stay with the team now. There were some concerns that him and AIYUK could be moved to different organizations via trade, but he's likely to stay with the team this season. So he changed his number. He's number 1 now. DEEBO Samuel Jr. or Senior, excuse me, Samuel Senior should be on the back of his jersey now. So he's playing for his son, obviously, and then also playing. He's number 1 now, so you will put that jersey on. We expecting a lot fantasy wise, but he got really hot in the second half, late in the season. So to me, it seems like DEEBO's all in. But the one thing we're gonna have to get used to is the spike weeks, and then probably some times where we have 2 or 3 weeks of mediocre to dud performances. So obviously going to be heavily involved in the run game, the ground, and then also in the passing game, yak type stuff. But for the most part, DEEBO Samuel, we should expect him to be wide receiver 2 level. Same thing goes for Brandon AIYUK, who was the wide receiver 14 in 16 games last year. So really good season for Brandon AIYUK. Playing for a new contract right now. Obviously, that was a lot of where like the smoke came from when it comes to the trade talks. There was talks about him going to Jacksonville, Buffalo, you name it. There was a lot of Steelers, a lot of teams interested in Brandon AIYUK pre-draft. And for good reason. He had 75 catches, 1,342 yards in the air, and then 7 touchdowns. So I think he could actually take on a slightly bigger workload this season, even with the type of yardage that he had. I could see a lot more receptions coming his way. So for him, all it takes is just a slight increase in output to be a top 10 receiver, and I think there's a possibility there. Can he be a top 5 guy? I don't really see that out of AIYUK in this offense unless DEEBO were to go down for an extended period of time. But Brandon AIYUK should be a really good fantasy player this season as well. So I know there's some concerns the team drafted Ricky Pearsell in the first round. There's also some talks that he might be traded at the deadline. My gut is that Brandon AIYUK stays with the team throughout the season. If they can't get a contract extension worked out, he'll be playing under the franchise tag. Obviously the next season, they have that at the disposal if they really need to. So I think he'll stay with the Niners this season. They'll work on, obviously, with this 5th-year option this year. Franchise is a possibility next year. So I'm not anticipating anything with Brandon AIYUK this season. Now, he only had 3 games under 10 fantasy points, which for me indicates that like he's a very consistent player and he does provide upside. So with AIYUK as a wide receiver 2, you have the upside for him to be a wide receiver 1, and you have a really nice wide receiver 2 floor on a weekly basis. So Brandon AIYUK should be part of your draft plans if you have if you're looking for like top 15 receivers. He might fall in drafts just because of the addition of Ricky Pearsell in the draft. I think he'll be a value this season as well. And speaking of Ricky Pearsell out of Florida, the Niners do use a lot of 2 receiver sets, which is the main concern for me when it comes to Pearsell. A lot of people are expecting him to take on a bigger role or maybe take away from DEEBO and AIYUK touches. I think this might be a preventative move in case they do decide to move away from Brandon AIYUK next season. So for me, he'll be a part of the offense, but I think one of these receivers needed to go in order for him to be useful, DEEBO or AIYUK. And I don't see that happening this year. So unless something crazy happens before the season starts, I don't see a whole lot of value with Ricky Pearsell in redraft and dynasty. It's a good offense to be attached to, good, obviously, with Kyle Shanahan. And then you got Brock Purdy, who's going to be in San Francisco for an extended period of time, Christian McCaffrey. So the offense is still going to be elite, and you want to be a part of that. But for this season specifically, I don't see it when it comes to Pearsell or Juwan Jennings, who looked really good in the postseason run last year, made some really timely catches, had some big performances, probably would have won Super Bowl MVP if it wasn't for, the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl. But I'm not expecting much from Juwan Jennings this year, he's on a restricted deal, and he hasn't signed that yet. So we'll see if he shows what happens with this receiving core. I'm anticipating DEEBO, AIYUK being the leaders of it, Pearsell being probably next in line, Juwan Jennings playing a nice serviceable role, but nothing for us fantasy-wise. And then when it comes to George Kittle, we know what to expect with him. He's been a top 5 tight end in 5 of the last 6 seasons. And the only one he wasn't, he got hurt. So last year he had 1,000-yard year, 6 touchdowns, 65 catches. So we know George Kittle, and he's a guy that a lot of times when the game plan dictates for him to have monster games, that's what happens. And he will be inconsistent at times because the offense doesn't need him. They can run through DEEBO, C-Mac, AIYUK at different times. He'll have his moments throughout the year, but Kittle is a player that obviously you can get at top 5 levels. Just know he's going to be inconsistent, does get dinged up at times. He had 9 games last year with double-digit fantasy points. So lets you know every other week you could probably expect George Kittle to have good performance, bad performance, good performance, bad performance. A lot of it is matchup dictated, okay? So with the 49ers, that's how they use him. They don't try to force things his way. The vital part of the offense, but not necessary, okay? If there's any other 49ers you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments. I went over all the fantasy relevant ones. Until the next one, peace out.